The world is in constant change. Throughout history, empires rose and dominated for a while, but it was always a matter of time until their dominance was challenged by rising competitors. The present is no different. The United States, a country that got used to being the sole superpower, now faces a rival that is reclaiming its historical position. Washington's concern is natural, but China's rise is not an anomaly. It is a return to normalcy. This video is about the rivalry between the United States and China, its origins, its dangers, and most importantly, can the two figure out how to compete without ending up in a catastrophic conflict? The United States is one of the luckiest nations in modern history. From its founding as an independent republic in 1776, it seemed destined sooner or later to become a global power. The greatest advantage the United States has is its extraordinary geography. A vast continent rich in arable land, natural resources, and navigable rivers, shielded by two immense oceans on its eastern and western flanks, and bordered to the north and south by relatively weak and historically friendly neighbors. This excellent position offered the young nation centuries of security, allowing it to develop in peace while European powers exhausted themselves in almost permanent wars. Free from the constant threat of invasion that hindered other great civilizations, America could focus on internal growth, expansion westward, and the building of its economic might. But America's rise to greatness was not due to geography alone. Its political and economic system, based on constitutional liberty, rule of law, and free enterprise, created what has long been the world's most innovative and dynamic society. In an era when much of the globe stagnated under monarchy or despotism, the United States offered unprecedented personal freedom and opportunity. It became a beacon, the embodiment of a dream that drew millions of ambitious immigrants from every corner of the world. Many of those who reached its shores brought talents that revolutionized industry, science, and culture, pushing America forward and earning it widespread admiration as a model of progress and prosperity. Ever since the United States emerged as a superpower in the 1940s, they have been consistent about one thing: eliminating any potential competitor. Whenever a rival looked like it might become a peer competitor, Washington saw it as an existential threat and mobilized its vast resources to counter and ultimately defeat those challengers. First, it was Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. These weren't just enemies in a war, they came with different visions for how the world should run. The US didn't just defeat them, they essentially deleted them as military powers and rebuilt them in the American image. Then came the Soviet Union. Since the invention of nuclear weapons prevented a direct military confrontation, the two powers engaged in a 4-decade struggle to gain dominance over the other through indirect means. This period, known as the Cold War, was characterized by ideological rivalry, economic competition, proxy wars, espionage, and a dangerous arms race. The United States ultimately emerged victorious because it maintained a robust and dynamic capitalist economy that fostered technological innovation and sustained military spending. In contrast, the Soviet planned economy struggled with inefficiency, stagnation, and an inability to keep pace with the technological advancements of the West. The appeal of democracy, individual freedoms, and market economy contrasted sharply with the authoritarianism and economic hardships under Soviet communism. Over time, the ideological legitimacy of the Soviet system eroded both domestically and internationally, leading to growing dissent within the Eastern Bloc. The last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, was aware of the bleak situation and introduced reforms known as perestroika and glasnost, which unintentionally accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. But now there's a new challenger on the scene, and this one is different from all the others. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were aggressive and ideologically extreme. The Soviet Union put up a long fight, but it was economically isolated and eventually collapsed under its own weight. China isn't like that. It's deeply integrated into the global economy, making a huge share of the world's products, trading with everyone and holding massive investments abroad. Its culture has survived for thousands of years, and even when it was militarily defeated, it absorbed and assimilated conquerors instead of being broken by them. China plays the long game, patient, step by step, focused on building strength over decades rather than rushing into risky gambles. To understand why China's rise is a normal, inevitable event, we have to look at the last few millennia. If we look at China through the lens of only the last 150 years, its rapid economic growth looks like a miracle or even an aggressive anomaly. However, from the perspective of the last 2000 years or more, the modern period in which China was weak and poor is actually the exception. What we are witnessing today is not a new phenomenon, but a return to a historical status quo that defined China for ages. China is not a nation-state in the traditional Western sense. Instead, it is often described as a civilization state. It is one of the oldest and most continuous civilizations in human history, maintaining a coherent cultural and linguistic identity through various dynastic cycles. For the vast majority of recorded history, China viewed itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the civilized world. This wasn't mere arrogance, it was a reflection of their reality. While Europe was stuck in the Middle Ages, China's Song dynasty was already undergoing a proto-industrial revolution, utilizing gunpowder, advanced printing, and the magnetic compass. Until the Industrial Revolution, the size of an economy was largely correlated with the size of its population. Because China possessed the most sophisticated agricultural techniques and a centralized bureaucracy, it supported the largest population on Earth. Historical economists such as Angus Madison have shown that for nearly 1,800 of the last 2,000 years, China was either the world's largest or second largest economy. During the Han, Tang, and Ming dynasties, China consistently produced between 20 and 30% of the world's total GDP. China was the ultimate destination for global trade. The world's silver flowed into China in exchange for silk, tea, and porcelain, the high-tech luxury goods of their time. China's rise is also a return to its role as the gravitational center of East Asia. Historically, China did not seek to colonize distant lands like European powers. Instead, it maintained a tributary system. Neighboring states, including what are now Korea, Vietnam, and Japan, often adopted Chinese writing systems, Confucian governance, and architectural styles. Dominance was expressed by China through cultural and economic prestige rather than direct territorial occupation. This established a stable, China-centric regional order that lasted for centuries. Chinese history is characterized by cycles of unification, fragmentation, and chaos, followed by periods of reunification and stability. Throughout its imperial past, China experienced phases where strong, central governments unified a vast territory, establishing order, cultural flourishing, and economic prosperity. However, these periods were often followed by times of political disintegration, internal strife, and external invasions, leading to fragmentation and chaos. This cyclical pattern repeated itself many times over the millennia. The year 1839 marked the start of one of the most devastating downward waves in this cycle. After centuries of dominance, the Qing dynasty had become militarily stagnant. When they clashed with the rising industrial powers of the West, the result was a catastrophe. The British used their superior navy to force opium into Chinese markets, sparking the Opium Wars. A civilization that once saw itself as the center of the world was suddenly carved up by foreign powers and forced to sign unequal treaties. What the Chinese called the Century of Humiliation wasn't just a military defeat, it was a total collapse of the old order. By 1911, the 2,000-year-old imperial system crumbled, leaving a vacuum filled by warlords, a brutal civil war between nationalists and communists, and a horrific invasion by Imperial Japan. For over 100 years, the Middle Kingdom was a playground for foreign interests, but the Chinese cycle always returns to unity. In 1949, after a long and bloody struggle, the Communist Party under Mao Zedong emerged victorious. Standing before a broken nation, Mao famously declared, "The Chinese people have stood up." To the West, 1949 was the start of the Cold War, but to China, it was the moment the century of humiliation ended and the long, patient rise back to their historical starting point began. When we see China's assertiveness today, we aren't seeing a new power trying to conquer the world. We are seeing an ancient one trying to regain its old position. As these two giants get closer in power, they are falling into a type of rivalry known to historians for over 2,000 years. It is called the Thucydides Trap. The term comes from the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, who observed the war between Athens and Sparta. He noted it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. This isn't just an ancient observation. Historians found many instances where a rising power challenged an established power. In most of those cases, including the rise of Germany against Britain before World War I, The result was a catastrophic war. Britain was the world's dominant global empire in the late 19th century, with an unmatched navy and a vast colonial empire. Germany was rapidly industrializing and expanding its military capabilities, especially its navy. The rivalry was complicated by a web of alliances, Britain aligned with France and Russia, while Germany was allied with Austria-Hungary and Italy. The intense rivalry and mutual fear was one of the factors that led to the outbreak of World War I. Britain entered the war primarily to counter Germany and maintain the balance of power in Europe. The war devastated Europe and ended with Germany's defeat, but the conflict also started the decline of the British Empire and set the stage for future conflicts. Today, the United States is the established power, seeing China's rise as a direct threat to the global primacy it has enjoyed since 1945. China, meanwhile, views its rise as a legitimate rejuvenation, a return to its rightful historical status after a century of weakness. The most dangerous aspect of this trap is what political scientists call the security dilemma. In an atmosphere of deep mistrust, neither power can truly know the other's intentions. When China builds a base in the South China Sea, it sees it as a defensive move to protect its trade routes, but Washington sees it as an offensive move to push the US Navy out of the Pacific. Then when the US strengthens its alliances with Japan or Australia, it sees it as a defensive effort to maintain stability. Beijing sees it as a hostile containment strategy designed to keep China down. Whenever one side takes a defensive action, the other side assumes it as an offensive one. This creates a feedback loop of escalation where both sides feel they are reacting to the other's aggression. However, unlike the rise of Germany, there is a massive check on this rivalry: nuclear weapons. Both the US and China possess second strike capabilities. This means that even if one side launched a surprise attack, the other will still have enough nuclear firepower to destroy the aggressor. In this environment, a direct military conflict between the two is not just risky, it is suicidal. This mutual assured destruction forces both sides to look for ways to compete that stop short of total war. Despite the historical pattern, there are powerful reasons why the US-China rivalry might be the exception to the rule. For the first time in history, the rising power and the established power are locked together in a way that makes war an act of self-destruction. Unlike the Soviet Union, which had a closed-off economy and traded mostly with other communist countries, China is the factory of the world. It is deeply integrated into the global economy the US built. Supply chains, investments, and trade are so intertwined that a full decoupling would be mutually devastating. You cannot destroy your rival's economy without destroying your own. Previous US rivals like Nazi Germany or the USSR were ideologically revolutionary. They wanted to export their system and overthrow the world order. China is different. It is primarily focused on internal stability and national strength. It doesn't want to export the Chinese Revolution, nor is trying to convince other countries to adopt its style of communism. Instead, it wants a larger seat at the table within the existing system. Past rivals were often economically fragile and military aggressive. China has shown a patient, long-term strategy that prioritizes technology, infrastructure, and economic power over the immediate territorial conquest that sparked wars in the past. How the relationship between the US and China is going to evolve matters for the entire planet. This is because if the two giants fight, they cannot do it in isolation. Any conflict between them is going to be felt by everyone, and in the case of a war, China and the US would take all of us with them. But things of course do not have to go into this darker route. The Thucydides Trap is a warning, not a prophecy. China's rise is part of a larger phenomenon. After 5 centuries of Western dominance, the world's center of gravity is moving towards Asia, where most people on Earth actually live. China is the biggest part of that story, but is not the only one. India, Indonesia and others are rising too. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed my video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. And leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.